Hello, and welcome to the Product Thinking Podcast. Today, we're joined by Bethany Lyons, who is the Chief Product Officer of KAWA Analytics. KAWA Analytics is a data analytics and operational intelligence platform, which helps its clients make data-driven decisions and provide access to key insights. Bethany has a wealth of experience and expertise in product and data analytics and different size companies. Previously, she worked at a Series B scale-up Mews, and before that, she was at Tableau from when it was an unknown startup all the way through its enterprise phase. Welcome, Bethany.
Thank you. Really delighted to be on the show today.
Thanks so much for joining us. So can you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get into product management? And specifically, how did you end up working at all these amazing data analytics places?
Yeah, definitely. So how I got into product management was through unrelenting persistence. I think if you want to move into product management, it's always a lot easier to transition in an existing company than to try to get a new company who you have no reputation with to hire you into an entirely new career. So I've been in London for my whole career in the UK. And Tableau is obviously West Coast, kind of Seattle-based company. And so the thousands of people in Tableau's R&D team were in the US, and they had a no hiring people outside the US policy for product management. So I had a pretty big barrier in place there. But I didn't care. I was like, I'm going to work on the product, like whether I'm allowed to or not. So I went out and brought like one of Tableau's best product managers on this like cross-European trip to about 30 different customers who all had like the same problem. And then we wrote this pitch for why we should invest in data modeling in Tableau. It got approved for funding by Adam Salipsky. They staffed the project with like 100 people. And then Roger quit. He was the PM I was working with on this. And so the project was then left without a leader. And so then there was a crisis of like, oh no, we've just like funded this huge initiative and like our key champion is gone. Bethany, do you want to step in and now take over? Because you're one of the only people with context about this problem since I'd been working on it before. So that was how I got into product management. They ended up like over making an exception to their policy of like requiring people to be US based. So a bit of luck, a bit of skill, being in the right place at the right time. And then, to your second question about analytics, that was also like kind of, you make your own luck. But I got one of the very first consultants in Europe at Tableau did the exact same master's program as I did at LSE. But just like a couple of years ahead. So he came recruiting in our pool of grads saying like, hey, we're hiring at Tableau. And I was like, I've never heard of this, but looked at the product, thought this looks great. Like my background was in operational research and math. So I'm kind of like a quant nerd. So it seemed pretty aligned. And then, took him up on his offer and the rest is history.
That's awesome. My major is actually operations research too. I've never met anybody else with it. Yeah. It's so funny. I'm like, everybody's like, what was that? And I'm like, it's just a bunch of quant stuff. I don't know how to describe it.
Invented in war.
Yeah. I'm like, it was the businessy type of engineering thing. So that's why I went into it.
Yeah, exactly.
So with all of these different companies too that you've worked at, they've been a lot of different phases. Like you said, Tableau was early stage. Nobody really knew about it. And then it scaled. It's huge, right? Like when you left, how big was Tableau?
So the engineering side was about, I don't know, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000. Like Wow. It was massive.
Yeah, that's a massive company then.
And when I joined, the entire company was only about 500 people.
Okay. So definitely big changes there. What have you observed, working from an enterprise perspective and then going into a startup? You're now you were employee number 10 at KAWA. And then you were at a scale up. Like what's different about product management that you've observed between those different phases?
Like absolutely everything. So in Tableau, it was all about stakeholder management and alignment, which is a fancy way of saying budget defense. Like, don't cut my project. And so, providing constant evidence for why we should continue to fund this 100-person engineering effort was like so much of what I did at Tableau. Whereas in a small startup, there are no stakeholders to manage. There's only runway to manage. And so the job is totally different. It's how do we like protect and extend the runway of the business is like the number one kind of top of mind, kind of existential question that I think about every single day, day in and day out.
So when you were thinking about defending your budget at Tableau, what types of scenarios would you get into where they would want to cut it? Like, what was that like? What was that process?
It's just like, so I think part of what made Tableau a complicated place is that when you have thousands of people working on one product, which is fairly unique, because I think in other companies, those thousands of people would be working on multiple product lines. We had thousands of people working on a single product. And so everybody wants to advance, their part of the product. And so in a way, it creates a bit of a competitive culture of like, why should we solve this problem over this other problem? And you need to be able to defend, what's going to deliver the highest value to the customer and ultimately to the business, like what's going to enable people to scale. And yeah, so that was why.
Okay. So you're coming into KAWA, you're now employee number 10. What's your day-to-day like that's different at KAWA than it was in the enterprise? Like, what are you more focused on, do you think, at the startup?
So yeah, I would say the number one question that I'm responsible for answering, as defined by me, because I wrote my own job description, is who is the customer? I think like the most important product decision that you ever make isn't anything to do with product. It's which customers do you onboard initially, because they end up shaping your marketing. They shape your product vision. This whole idea of like, oh, you can, just build whatever you want is so not true. You have to build the product to solve the needs of the customers that you onboard. And so much of what I do is try to understand like different customers or prospects' problems and see like, is solving that problem aligned to our vision? And if so, then I probably want to onboard that customer. If not, I don't want them as a customer. And so what that means is I'm actually responsible for sales in our company. We don't have any salespeople. And it's because like who is the customer is not something I'm willing to outsource as it's the biggest product decision we'll ever make. So yeah.
So when you're trying to figure out in these early stages too, who your customer is, what's your approach? Because if you're building something like an analytics platform, there could be many people, and KAWA, from what I understand, is for business users. So like you could go after any size company, any type of users within the business with the data. Like, how are you sifting through and trying to figure out which people are core and which people are our target?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what we look at is willingness to pay and urgency of the problem. So I'll give you an example. In a hedge fund, the willingness to pay is extremely high because the day in and day out operations of like traders and portfolio managers is analyzing risk and analyzing their position. And they do that all today in like very manual ways in Excel. So we bring like scale and automation, collaboration, security, governance, like a whole bunch of things that they don't have today to their workflow, to enable them to run their business in a much better way. So yeah, willingness to pay is super high and urgency is super high in a hedge fund. Then we have, other people who are also like Excel users, but they're not using spreadsheets to do their job. They're using spreadsheets to measure things that are like tangential to their job. And so that use case is like kind of less interesting to us because it's like maybe once a month they run some numbers to check their performance. And it's kind of like, you're not materially moving the needle on your outcomes. You're just like measuring them. So we're less interested in those use cases.
Okay.
Which is why we invented this term operational intelligence to kind of narrow down, like, we want to be the analytics platform where, like, in the circumstances where data is being used in a very operational capacity, not just to like generate like ad hoc insights. I don't know if that kind of answers the question.
For like operational intelligence and using it in an operational way, what's different between that and ad hoc? Like, how are your customers using your platform?
So yeah, like an operational use case would be like a trader in a bank or a hedge fund. Like every single day, they're using our tool to make decisions about investments. So that's like a very operational use case. It's like it's driving the core decision making of their job.
Okay.
Whereas an ad hoc use case would be like, I want to make an argument to like get a raise. And so I'm going to prove that I've like hit some metric so I can tell this story to my manager about why they should give me a raise. That's like not really an operational use case. It's like an ad hoc use case where, it's like maybe helpful to that person, but like we can't turn around and say like, at the end of the day, here's how we advanced your business.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, and it also sounds like the frequency, like the first use case with the hedge funds, they're using it every single day. It's like a core part of their workflow. Whereas the other ones, it's like, oh, let me go pull up that platform that we have that we forgot about that we're paying a subscription for. So those people probably aren't quite as sticky as the ones who use it.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly. 100%.
So when you're in a startup environment too, the question I get asked a lot on this podcast is, I want to be a data-driven product manager. I want to do it right. I want to use all the analytics to inform my next decision, but I'm working in a startup. We have no data yet. We just launched. Yeah. We're still figuring it out. Or I launched a new product line inside a very large company or a new feature inside a very large company. And I don't have the metrics. How do you make decisions in the absence of data then?
Yeah, so I view data, like as it's applied to product management, as an optimizer. It's like if I want to get a 1% improvement out of something, I'm going to use data to do that. But data is never going to tell you what to do. And if you're optimizing in a startup, you're like not on the right track at all. Like being in a startup is about pioneering, not about optimization. So like, I'll just be blunt, like we just don't use data right now because there isn't any. We have to use like a vision and opinion that we have about the world and kind of our intuition of the problem space and like a ton of qualitative feedback. Like that's the data that we use is like 100% qualitative. It's from interviews with people and it's from like going out and trying stuff. Like it's like going out and trying to sell the product. If people don't want to buy it, don't force it. We're trying to find like where's the pull and where are we pushing? And if we're pushing, then we just withdraw completely and say like, okay, that's just not something we should be doing.
I really like this because I think I always advocate for people being data-driven product managers. But what I've seen in a lot of places is that people are waiting for data to just give them the answer. And like you said, it won't give you the answer, right? It's an optimizer thing. And I've seen both leaders and product managers who are junior kind of like say, oh, we don't have the data. I can't act, right? Like I can't make a decision. And it paralyzes them, right? And it makes the team not go anywhere. It makes them like not actually move. So I like kind of what you're saying here. On the catch side though, I wonder, how do you balance making sure that you're doing the right thing, right? Measuring it along the way and seeing that. And it sounds like in the early stages right now, you're using qualitative data, which is data, right? It's just not like things that we instrumented in our platform. It's qualitative data. You're using the qualitative data for feedback. How would you suggest people make sure that they're building the right thing along the way as they start scaling and measuring data? And how should they be looking at that to inform like what to do next or how they're progressing?
Yeah, I would say you need to lay out the questions you want to answer before you instrument your product. Because I think like some people are like, let's just collect all the data we can possibly collect rather than approaching it with like a hypothesis driven mindset. So I would first come up with the hypotheses of like, what are the top 10 questions we need to answer about our product? And then do the instrumentation of data. Because in some ways you then create accountability to come back and actually answer those questions when you do have a steady stream of data. Whereas if you just instrument everything, and I've worked at companies that instrument everything, they're the least data-driven companies because they've never created questions to be accountable to. So yeah, I would say don't try to be data-driven, try to be hypothesis-driven. And then like it's being data driven as a consequence of that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Be hypothesis driven, actually know what questions. And I think that's a big part of actually being a good product manager is it's not about actually doing the analysis on the data. It's at picking the right questions to be asked. And then hopefully using a tool like KAWA or something to like help you figure out what the answers are. But I think people get that wrong. It's like it's not about doing the analysis. It's about actually asking the right questions.
Exactly. Yeah.
So when you're looking at, KAWA, you're in early stages right now, you're figuring out who your customers are. How are you thinking about data for scale? How are you thinking about measuring progress in an early stage company? So you're using the qualitative feedback right now. What are you doing though, as the chief product officer to make sure that you do hold yourself accountable, like you were saying, and going back and checking it and measuring progress and making sure you're on the right path? Like, what are you instrumenting now to do that later?
To do that. So our like one of our number one product priorities is to have like totally seamless onboarding. We don't want people to have to interact with us as they're learning the product. So at the moment we're doing a ton of screen shares with people to see like what do they do when they get started in the product. In the future, we're going to want to instrument like an event kind of collection to figure out what's the sequence of actions people are taking and how far does the path that they take deviate from our ideal path to get to kind of activation and like realization of that first value of the product. So yeah, it'll be figuring out data is just listening at scale. And right now we don't have a scale problem. So we're able to just like listen to individuals. But the first place that we're going to instrument data is definitely in the collection of events to track our onboarding experience.
Nice.
And the reason for that, just to clarify, is like the number one kind of product driver of revenue is the user activation. So the user reaching the point of value in your product. So that's the metric that we're going to optimize for. And we haven't yet defined what is an activation in our product. So that's another thing we need to think about is like, how do we know somebody's realized value? Like, is it when they group a view? Is it when they share a view? Is it when they build a dashboard? We're not sure. So that's a big open question is what's the value realization point?
I think that's a really hard question to answer. And I've seen people struggle with it too. What's your process for figuring out what that is? Like, what are you looking at? What's going to tell you like, yeah, this is it?
I think it's a good question. I think it'll be correlating user activity to account revenue. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard data problem. And it's I think again, like we're still in the early stage of like defining our ICP. So it's not something we've tackled yet, but it will definitely be something that we'll be looking at in the future.
Cool. So it's like, get all the people onto the platform, let them just go, let them use it. And then we're going to look at some lagging indicators later and just see how they correlate back to how people are using the platform.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So when you're trying to figure out to your core value proposition here, how do you know, I guess in general too, and it could be for KAWA or somewhere else you've worked, but like, how do you know what's the core, right? And how do you make sure you're not getting distracted on building like a bunch of features and requests that people are asking for, right? I'm sure with the qualitative data you're getting right now, everybody's like, oh, it'd be cool if it could do this and it'd be cool if it could do that and all this stuff. How do you kind of sift through that noise and make sure that you don't stray from what's really going to provide that value?
It's a really good question. So we're fortunate at KAWA that we have like really strong agreement between myself, the CTO, and the CEO as to what our core value proposition is. And so our core value proposition is actually exactly the same as what Tableau's core value proposition is, just for a different persona, which is putting business logic in the hands of business users. So anything around like defining calculations, like turning a question, like kind of a question into a computation, like that's our core value proposition. And something that would be adjacent to that is then like setting up a workflow trigger. So that's like a place that we can, explore expanding the product, but it's not like the core and the essence of what we do. We're like really a user-friendly way of defining calculations on data. That's it. I think having that clear vision from the outset and having agreement among everyone makes it it's not really ambiguous for us. I don't know how to generalize that to other companies.
Yeah.
It's just like when I was at Tableau, I worked in consulting before I became a product manager, and it was just like very obvious that was the value of Tableau, as well as it enabled analysts to define business logic instead of relying on IT. And that's why, I always worked in the calculation team, because I'm like, actually, the core value of Tableau is the calculations, not the visualizations. The visualizations is just the marketing engine of the company.
I think that's smart too, if you hone in on that and look for that in your career, because I see a lot of product managers end up in companies or different like parts of the product that are not the core value proposition. And then they struggle with what you were talking about, like defending the budget, right? Not getting cut, being seen as valuable in those different areas. And that's really hard, I think, if you're working on adjacent type things.
Yes. And if I were to be truly honest, I would say so the project that I worked on Tableau is the only surviving initiative post Salesforce acquisition. Almost everything else has been killed. And if I'm being really honest with myself, it's not because my budget defense skills were amazing. It's because I just happened to work in the area of the product that was the core. And so eventually the company kind of converged on the fact that okay, this is our core value proposition. Let's invest in it. So that would be my advice to product managers when you're picking a job is do the thing, do the core thing. Don't be an adjacency. And so don't just pick a company, pick a role within the company that's intimately tied to the core value proposition. And I in all honesty, I didn't last very long at Mews. I was only there for 9 months, something like that. They're a hotel tech company, and I was working in analytics. I was the most adjacent to the core mission of the company than anyone. And that was why I left. I was I'm not doing the thing. Why am I here?
Yeah, that's a really good tip, I think, for people who are out there looking for it, what to do. And if they're in an adjacency or feeling like this is not working, or I'm having trouble defending my budgets, or I just don't feel connected, to actually look for the core and try to transition. So when you joined KAWA, you were employee number 10, but not the first product manager. There was somebody else there, but you were hired in as a product leader, and you work really closely with the founders still who were there. Mm-hmm. I know this is a tricky thing for a lot of product leaders, right? You've got founders, it's this is their baby. They have got a lot of stake in this. How do you make sure that you're still on the same page with the founders? How do you kind of navigate that as the first product leader in a small company?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I should tell the story of how I ended up in KAWA. So I left Mews because I was in adjacency. And I didn't have a next thing. And I didn't have I looked around at other companies, and there wasn't a company where I thought gee, I really want to join that. So in my period of profound unemployment, I just declared myself a founder. And I was I'm going to build my own company. And I started doing a bunch of market research, customer research, and to figure out what problem am I solving in this hypothetical company. And then I was just posting on LinkedIn every day about my findings and my experiences. And Hussam, the CEO of KAWA, came across my posts, and he was hey, you're writing about my company. It already exists. We've been building this for 1.5 years. We've got all this funding. We've got it's a whole team and 500,000 lines of code. What are you doing this on your own? Come join us. So I think I have a fairly unique experience in I joined a company where I have a very strong shared vision with the founders. And so I haven't had the issues that other product leaders have where, they're butting heads because they don't have a shared vision. So my advice is I think it's all about picking the right company and the right founder. And if you're in a situation where you are butting heads, do something different, because that's an insurmountable obstacle. It's kind of the way I would see it.
So what'd you do to I know you were writing about this on LinkedIn, which is amazing. So the founder could see your perspective on everything. What'd you do when he called and wanted to sit down and just go through, your shared vision? How'd you make sure you were aligned? And I guess what are acceptable places to, I guess, to digress or have different ideas, or say hey, but what about this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I actually thought he was crazy when I first met him. He was like telling me, he was just describing the features that he built. Like, he's a very technical guy. He's like not a marketing oriented guy at all. This guy used to run an IT department in a bank. And I was like, what? Like, what have you built? And he's like, I love my product. And I was like, everybody loves their product. That's not a selling point. And, he was like, so after this conversation, he's like, let me give you a demo of the product. And I was like, sure, whatever. And then I was so convinced that like this guy was like off on one, that I showed up like 20 minutes late for our meeting. I almost didn't go. And then like within 5 minutes of him demoing the product, I was like, oh my God, this man is a genius. I have worked with some of the best data UX people in the world at Tableau, and he has surpassed them. He has built the product that Tableau wishes it could build, but like never succeeded at. And it's because he has this like joint understanding of design and data. And that communication gap, like even with the 3,000 people in Tableau, like they never got there because the people who understand design don't understand data, and the people who understand data don't understand design. So I was like, I don't care like how many disagreements we have, like I can work with you because you are like best in class, best in the world at data UX. So yeah, I think if you have like enough of a pull in one direction, then you can overcome anything.
That's
like
amazing.
any disagreements.
That's such a hard skill to find too, like somebody who can do both the design pieces and the technical pieces when it comes to data. Like modeling data and visualizing it is such a tough skill. So that's amazing.
Yeah. And he can manage people. Like he ran a 600-person team at at the largest bank in Europe. Like I was just like, how can so many skills exist in one person? It's just, it's outstanding.
So it sounds like also respecting your founder very well.
Yeah, it's like
it's helpful.
Like if I could have like dreamt of like a boss, I wouldn't have been able to dream up Hussab.
Amazing. So definitely finding somebody that is awesome, somebody that you would want to follow into this type of work. That definitely sounds like a great trait for looking for someone that you could work with. Now, when you came into KAWA as well, with 10 people, what's your biggest challenge, I guess, right now? Like, what are you talked about, sorry, let me restart. You already talked about this with the customer pieces and then the product manager. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, so let me restart this, was how much you dive in an early stage company versus how you think about scaling the team in the future. So you, again, employee number 10, walk in here, you've got one product manager and you come in as a chief product officer. In early stage companies, how do you think about diving in, getting your hands dirty, right? And then scaling the team for the future? And how do you make sure that you are doing things that will help scale, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than getting too sucked into the weeds?
Yeah, it's a great question. So again, I guess this is somewhat repetitive of what I said before, but like I truly believe that the most important product decision that ever gets made is like, who are the first customers that you onboard? And if you onboard the wrong customers who don't have like a very high overlapping shared problem set, it becomes impossible to scale the business because every customer is asking for different features and has different problems. So I really believe that getting the right set of customers on the platform with a shared overlapping problem is the way that you scale the business. So that's my view for now. I don't have like a great long-term view of like what's our hiring plan in 3 years from now. There's just too many other burning problems to think about that. But I also think it takes a different leader at different stages of the company. And so it's not like beyond the pale that I would hire my replacement at some point, because I'm definitely like more of a pioneer than like an optimizer. So yeah, I don't know if I would be the right CPO for KAWA when it's like a multi-billion-dollar company. And like, I think I could be great as an individual contributor doing more like customer research at one point. So that's a potential opportunity in the future.
I think you're bringing up a great point here too. Like you said, the leaders at different stages are all different types of people. And I don't think people really recognize that, because I've worked with a lot of companies before where, somebody's been there from day one. right? They came in as they were, called the chief product officer because they were the first product manager. They were there from day one, maybe the second. And now the company is 500 people and they've got 4 different product lines and they're starting to scale. And then the problems and the challenges of that scale become different. It's not like figuring out who our customers are. It's about like building a team and like setting up operations and creating, working with the board to justify your actions and like make sure they can get budget and like fundraise. And I don't think a lot of people recognize how different it is to go from very early stage to go to scale up and then even enterprise, right? Where you got to be a political genius in some places.
Right.
And,
which I am not.
And manage the stakeholders. So it's like nice to hear you talk about that because I think a lot of people get to that point where, they grow up through this company and they love it and they don't want to leave it, but they're also, they feel like by not being the chief product officer, right, when it hits that 1,000 person mark, the 500 person mark, that they failed, right? They see it as a failure instead of like just a different phase.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I'm really glad to be on this podcast because I'm reaching an audience of my potential future bosses. So, anybody out there who kind of works in product and data analytics, who's worked in massive companies, like, please reach out because I might want to hire you as my boss.
Love that. I like that. It's so refreshing to hear somebody talk about that too. So with KAWAs and with being a leader going through all of these, different phases of thinking about who's our customer, what are we building, how do we focus on the core? I feel like I have to ask this, and I keep asking a bunch of product leaders this. AI.
Oh.
Yay, right? Like I just feel like I have to approach it. So you've got all these wonderful things out there, AI, ChatGPT, all of that stuff. How are you thinking about it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're thinking of it as like the future of user interfaces. And in a way, it's not that the user interface will go away. It's just that for 80% of the things, you'll interact through a chat. And then you'll still have the user interface for doing like more advanced configuration. That's the way that we're thinking about it, is like an assistant that makes you not have to bear the burden of like feature overload in a fairly complex product. So we are building a chat assistant. It can do like, basic data mining and cleaning and analytics tasks. Like If you give it a list of countries, we can go out and like populate a new column that gives you the capital city of every country, as an example. Just by like typing in natural language, like, what are the capital cities of each of these countries? And then I think in the future, we'll want to integrate that with like the internal knowledge of the company, because with data, obviously the questions that you answer are like more nuanced to each business. So that's kind of the way that we're thinking about it. Cool. It's not like our product isn't going to be an AI product. It's going to have an AI assistant.
Okay. I like that. I feel like a lot of people got so thrown off with ChatGPT going out there. I've heard companies be like, oh, we're stopping everything to go build this, make it AI, just like slap an AI thing on it. And I've also observed so many companies just like straying from their core to focus all their attention on AI or put a feature out there with AI to like hit the buzzword. So that they can like look exciting. Meanwhile, their core product sucks. Like it doesn't even work. And then they're getting distracted that way. How'd you guys sit down and actually come to an agreement and say like, was there a distraction at all? Were you all just like super level-headed about this? Or was anybody like, we have to do the AI thing?
No, I think we were super level-headed about it. And we were kind of like, this is not our priority, but if we have time, we'll work on it. And then we had time, and we've got some pretty kick-ass developers who just went out there and made it happen. So we're pretty shrewd in our prioritization, which left some kind of free time for them to experiment with AI. But it's not like we're not out there selling an AI product at all. We don't even mention it unless people ask. Yeah, because it's so early and it's so adjacent to the core product.
Cool. I think that's very smart and rational. So for you, when you're thinking about, next phases for KAWA and the startup on this growth trajectory, what are you excited for?
What am I excited for? I'm actually really excited about, I'll tell you where I view my career going. I think like I'll do the CPO thing until we have like a very clear ICP and like we've got funding, we've got customers, we've got runway, and it's just a matter of scaling. And then I really want to work on implementing like growth strategies and, using product as a distribution channel, because that's really then at the intersection of data and product. It's like, how do we use the data that we collect in the product to optimize our activation and our acquisition, activation, retention, and monetization. So I'm like following Leah Tarrin and Elena Verna like religiously. I love everything that they're putting out there. And when we have more data, I want to implement a lot of what they are preaching and have like real, kind of metrics to show for how like we did this in the product and this was the impact it had on the business.
Cool. I'm really excited to watch that too. So to leave us on this note, what's your advice for people who are considering going to an early stage startup? I actually have a bunch of HBS students who really want to be like number one product manager at a really early stage company, because one, a lot of times I think they just think they're going to get a massive amount of equity and be the next like Jeff Bezos. So
wow.
That's definitely like a poll that I've seen on a lot of people who think if they get in, early stage, that's it. Like, they'll just make a great exit and they'll be extremely rich. But a lot of them want to be like number one. What would you tell them to consider, having seen all these different stages?
I would say like, if your reason for wanting to be number one is to get a ton of equity, like you are in for a world of disappointment. So I'll tell you what I've done. I've set up my personal finances so that like if KAWA totally crashes and burns, it has like no financial impact on me. So my husband is basically like, this was a joint decision with him for me to join a startup. And he's kind of agreed to like take care of like the basic needs of us. And so like, I'm not responsible for paying any bills. I have like total freedom to just like enjoy and like see where this goes. So I wouldn't bet your personal like financial future on an early stage startup. Because you also don't behave in a rational way when your personal finances are so tied up in a company. So that's why I'm very happy. My husband he's the safety net, as he calls himself. So that's one thing. Two is like, if it's your first job, you have no experience, and that absence of experience is going to show up like just in volumes inside of a startup. You can't hide in a startup. Like your weaknesses are going to be on display for everybody. And like the success of the business is going to like ride on you overcoming your weaknesses. Whereas in a larger company, you can kind of like play to your strengths. You can like kind of hide your weaknesses a little bit more. You can hone them. Like there's more opportunity for learning. In an early stage startup, like nobody's going to train you. Like we have some junior people and like, I don't have time to be like training them and doing career building. I'm trying to make sure you get paid. So that's what the senior people in the company are going to be thinking about is like, can I get you your next paycheck? Not like, how do I help you with your career progression? So I would say like, if you're fresh out of college, don't join an early stage startup. Go get experience somewhere, and like set up your financial security so that you can then like take the risk later on without, like having such a huge impact on your personal life.
I think that's extremely wise words for people out there listening. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for being so honest about your journey. If people want to go follow you, learn more about you, where can they find you?
Just connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can send me an email at bethany@kawa.ai. Happy to chat with anyone.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us, Bethany. It's been great having you on the Product Thinking Podcast.
Thank you.
For those of you listening, if you enjoyed this podcast, please hit subscribe to the Product Thinking Podcast so that you never miss an episode. Next Wednesday, we'll be back with another Dear Melissa, where I answer all of your questions about product management. There is no question too big or small. So go to dearmelissa.com and let me know what you're thinking. We'll see you next time.